You don't own this road anymore, Mr. Granger.
You might want to call your attorney.
You don't own this road anymore, Mr. Granger. Patricia Holloway said it loud enough for the entire delivery line to hear as she snapped a heavy HOA chain through the iron gates my grandfather welded back in 1952. The metal clanged hard in the cold morning air, echoing across the valley while 3 pickup trucks sat trapped behind her like cattle waiting at auction. My ranch hands stared in disbelief. One of them still had frost on his gloves from loading feed before sunrise. My granddaughter Lucy stood beside my truck clutching her backpack, confused why a woman in a cream-colored blazer was locking our family out of land we'd worked for nearly a century and a half. Then Patricia smiled at her. That was the part that stuck with me. Not angry, not yelling, just polished suburban satisfaction, like she'd finally found the moment she'd been rehearsing in her head for months. Maybe now your family learns who actually controls this valley. Behind her, a tow truck driver hooked chains onto my cattle trailer parked along the gravel shoulder, while Lake Wind rolled through the cottonwoods carrying the smell of wet cedar and diesel exhaust. Fog hung low over the water beyond the ranch fence, thick enough to swallow the fishing docks down by Miller Creek. Somewhere out in the pasture, one of my horses started kicking the fence rails, nervous from all the noise. I looked past Patricia toward the subdivision sitting up on the ridge above my property. 42 custom homes, 3 cul-de-sacs, 1 entrance road. My road. What Patricia Holloway didn't understand yet was that every single family in Holloway Ridge Estates depended on the easement crossing Granger Ranch. School buses, utility crews, emergency vehicles, Amazon deliveries, every last one of them. And standing there in Italian leather boots sinking into ranch mud, Patricia had just violated the one clause nobody in her HOA apparently bothered to read. Mr. Granger, the tow truck guy asked carefully. You want me to stop? Patricia answered before I could. Continue. The board approved enforcement action unanimously. That word enforcement hung in the air, ugly and artificial against the sound of wind pushing rain across the metal roofs of my equipment barn. She loved words like that. Enforcement. Compliance. Community standards. Patricia weaponized polished language the way some people carry pocket knives. Calm enough to sound reasonable. Sharp enough to leave damage behind. I took the old coffee thermos from my truck bed and poured myself half a cup while she watched me, probably expecting a shouting match for her HOA Facebook group later. Instead, I just nodded once. You might want to call your attorney, I said quietly. For the first time all morning, her smile tightened. Tiny crack, barely visible, but it was there. Because deep down, Patricia Holloway already knew something wealthy suburban people hate admitting out loud. Old land remembers things paperwork forgets. Before I tell you what happened next, comment below with your city and let me know if you've ever dealt with one of these HOA tyrants, because what Patricia did over the next 10 days turned this entire county upside down. And by the end of it, even the sheriff's office stopped taking her calls. The rain started about 20 minutes after Patricia chained the gates shut. Not hard rain yet, just that cold Tennessee drizzle that settles into denim, truck seats, and old wood fences until everything smells like wet cedar and damp earth. By noon, half the county already knew something had happened at Granger Ranch. That is the thing about small towns with expensive subdivisions shoved beside old family land. News travels faster than weather. I drove down to Miller's Diner off Route 18 because sitting alone in my kitchen with my grandfather's land locked behind HOA chains felt dangerous in a different way. The diner was mostly quiet except for silverware tapping plates and rain ticking softly against the windows. 3 men from the feed supply company stopped talking the second I walked in. One nodded at me carefully. Another looked away. Social pressure had already started moving through the valley like fog over lake water. Patricia had people convinced this was some kind of safety enforcement dispute. That was her talent. She never attacked directly at first. She reframed, controlled the language before anyone could control the facts. Darlene, the waitress, topped off my coffee without asking. Heard they shut your gate, she said quietly. Temporary, I answered. She studied me for a second. That woman smiles too much when bad things happen. I almost laughed at that because it was true. Patricia smiled like somebody posing beside a controlled fire she secretly started herself. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere over Blackwater Lake, while fog swallowed the fishing docks near the shoreline. I checked my phone. 6 missed calls. 2 from ranch hands. 1 from the cattle supplier. 3 from numbers I did not recognize. The last voicemail came from Holloway Ridge Estates itself. Angry resident. Male voice. My wife cannot get home because your gate issue backed traffic onto County Road 12 for an hour. My gate issue. Not Patricia illegally chaining private property. Already the blame was shifting sideways exactly the way HOA politics always worked. I drove back toward the ranch with windshield wipers pushing muddy rainwater aside in slow, uneven rhythm. Halfway up the gravel drive, I noticed fresh tire marks cutting across my north pasture. Deep ones. Recent. Somebody had driven around the chained gate entirely and crossed protected grazing land to reach the subdivision. That got my attention immediately because nobody local would make that mistake during wet season unless they thought they had permission. Near the ridge fence line, I found orange survey flags planted beside the easement road. New ones. Patricia had not just blocked access. She had survey crews out on my property. I crouched beside one of the markers while cold wind pushed across the pasture carrying the metallic smell of incoming rain. Holloway Ridge Development Expansion Phase 2. That wording sat printed across the plastic tag in black lettering. Expansion. I stared at it for a long second. Then another. Suddenly the chains on my gate made a lot more sense. Patricia was not trying to control the road anymore. She was trying to redefine ownership before expansion permits finalized. And judging by how fast survey crews moved, this had been coordinated long before this morning. A pickup truck rolled slowly down the hill behind me. Patricia's white Lexus followed close behind it, tires crunching wet gravel. She stepped out holding an umbrella the color of fresh cream. Calm. Perfect posture. Smug enough to make a preacher swear. Mr. Granger, she called gently over the wind. You should really stop resisting progress. It is making people uncomfortable. I stood up slowly, mud on my boots, rain soaking through my flannel collar. Funny, I said, because I think panic is about to make people a whole lot more uncomfortable than me. Her smile stayed in place, but this time it looked thinner. That night the storm finally broke over Blackwater County hard enough to shake the windows in my ranch house. Rain hammered the metal roof in uneven bursts while thunder rolled across the lake like distant construction equipment. I sat at my kitchen table under the yellow light above the stove staring at those orange survey flags spread across the pasture map I had drawn from memory on an old feed invoice. My father used to say you could tell when people planned to steal land because they always measured it before they respected it. Around 9:30 my phone buzzed again. This time it was Sheriff Coulter Briggs. Wes, he said carefully, I need to ask you something before tomorrow gets ugly. That was not how lawmen talked unless pressure was already coming down from somewhere expensive. I leaned back in the chair and listened to rainwater drip steadily from my coat onto the hardwood floor. Patricia call you? Silence first. Then a sigh. 3 times. Of course she had. Patricia did not solve problems. She surrounded them socially until people got tired enough to surrender. The sheriff lowered his voice. County commissioner got involved too. Holloway Ridge residents are claiming restricted access is affecting emergency response times. I almost laughed at that because the only people restricting access were standing behind HOA chains on my gate 12 hours earlier pretending private ranch land belonged to suburban board members with matching golf carts. But hearing county officials already parroting Patricia's language tightened something in my chest anyway, because that was how old family land disappeared in America now. Not with guns. With committees. With development meetings. With smiling people calling theft progress. You know that road predates their subdivision by 80 years, I said quietly. I know, Briggs answered. But I also know half this county suddenly thinks you are trying to trap families behind a gate. After the call ended, I stood on the back porch under cold rain watching fog drift low across the muddy shoreline beyond the lower pasture. My grandfather built this house after returning from Korea. My father buried 3 hunting dogs beneath the cedar tree beside the barn. Lucy learned to fish off that dock before she could spell her last name. And somewhere along the way, Patricia Holloway had managed to reduce all of it into an inconvenience on a homeowners association agenda. That thought stayed with me the next morning as I drove into town through heavy fog and standing water. Pickup trucks crowded the parking lot outside Granger County Administrative Services. Contractors, surveyors, utility men. Everybody suddenly moving faster than normal. Inside the county building, the air smelled like burnt coffee, wet jackets, and old paper. People stopped talking when I walked through the lobby. Two women near the permit desk glanced away so fast, it almost looked rehearsed. Public pressure had escalated overnight. Patricia was feeding narratives to anyone willing to repeat them. Near the zoning office window, I spotted a large presentation board leaning against the wall covered with architectural renderings. Future Holloway Ridge Expansion Community Phase 2. Luxury waterfront homes. Private marina. Walking trails. My stomach dropped when I saw the access route highlighted in red. It cut directly through Granger Ranch. Not around it. Through it. Full commercial access. Wider roads. Visitor traffic. Service lanes. They were not trying to negotiate easement use anymore. They were planning permanent transformation. Beautiful, is it not? Patricia's voice floated beside me before I even turned around. She stood there holding a leather portfolio against her chest like she already owned the building too. This county is evolving, Wesley. People want modern infrastructure now. I looked at the rendering again, then at her. You filed expansion plans before you chained my gates. She tilted her head slightly. Tiny smile. Preparation is not a crime. No, I said calmly. But fraudulent disclosure might be. For the first time since this started, Patricia did not answer immediately. And that silence told me more than any county document ever could. By late afternoon, the rain had turned the lower edge of my ranch into thick black mud that clung to truck tires and work boots alike. Fog rolled low across Blackwater Lake, swallowing the shoreline until the fishing docks looked like broken shadows floating in open water. I sat inside my truck outside the county annex building with the heater running low and my grandfather's old leather document case resting on the passenger seat beside me. I had not opened that case in almost 6 years. Not since my father died. The thought alone tightened my chest harder than Patricia ever could. Because once family land goes into legal war, everything buried inside it comes back up too. Old promises, old mistakes, old paperwork people forgot existed for a reason. Across the parking lot, I watched residents from Holloway Ridge gathering near the courthouse steps in small nervous clusters. Nobody looked relaxed anymore. Earlier that morning, Patricia had posted a carefully worded statement in the community forum accusing me of threatening subdivision infrastructure and jeopardizing property values. By lunchtime, screenshots had spread across half the county. Some residents believed her completely. Others were starting to ask dangerous questions. Why would a private ranch owner suddenly risk lawsuits unless something bigger was happening underneath the surface? That uncertainty was beginning to infect the entire subdivision. And Patricia hated uncertainty because control depended on people staying emotionally organized around her version of reality. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was Valerie Pike, owner of the feed supply store outside town. Wesley, she said quietly, you need to know survey crews were back out near your north pasture this morning before sunrise. I stared through the windshield while courthouse rain streaked sideways across the glass. How many? 3 trucks. County contractor plates. Another silence. Then she lowered her voice. People are talking about marina permits now. Marina. I closed my eyes for a second. Suddenly, the waterfront renderings made horrifying sense. This was never just luxury housing expansion. Patricia and the developers wanted lake access through Granger Ranch itself. Boat slips. Tourism traffic. Commercial shoreline rights. They were trying to turn 150 years of ranch land into lakefront revenue property without ever saying the quiet part out loud. Thank you, I said. You did not hear this from me. Valerie answered quickly before hanging up. More cracks. More people quietly slipping information away from Patricia's control. But the social atmosphere around town had turned ugly by then. At Miller's Diner, 2 teenagers stopped filming on their phones when I walked in for coffee. A couple near the front booth stared openly before whispering to each other. Somebody had already painted me into the villain role online. Angry ranch owner versus trapped suburban families. Patricia understood modern pressure campaigns frighteningly well. She did not need facts yet. She just needed emotional momentum. Darlene slid my coffee across the counter carefully. Folks are nervous, she said softly. Sheriff's office got 6 calls this afternoon asking if the subdivision can legally lose road access. I looked down at the steam rising from the cup. Can they? She asked. Before I answered, thunder cracked hard enough outside to shake the diner windows. Every conversation inside stopped for half a second. Then the front door opened and Patricia Holloway walked in wearing a charcoal raincoat and carrying that same leather portfolio like she was arriving for a board meeting instead of a public execution. The room shifted immediately. People straightened in their seats. Conversations died. Even the waitress near the register looked tense. Patricia noticed me at the counter and smiled with practiced sadness this time instead of superiority. New tactic. Softer approach. More dangerous. She walked over slowly, heels tapping against old diner tile, while rainwater dripped from her umbrella onto the floor. "Wesley," she said gently, almost sympathetic now, "this does not have to become ugly for everyone." I took a slow sip of coffee. Too late. Her smile barely moved. "You still think this is about one road?" I set the cup down carefully. "No," I said. "I think it is about who lied to 42 families before they bought homes on restricted land." For the first time since this began, Patricia's composure slipped badly enough for people around us to notice it too. Patricia recovered fast in front of the diner crowd, but not fast enough to erase what people saw across her face when I mentioned restricted land disclosures. That was the first real shift. Tiny, fragile, but in small American counties, public confidence works like cracked lake ice. Once people hear the first fracture underneath somebody important, they start testing the surface themselves. Patricia straightened her raincoat slowly and forced another polished smile toward the room. "You are frightening people unnecessarily," she said softly. "Families invested their lives into this community." I looked around the diner. Half the customers were pretending not to listen while hearing every word. Then maybe they deserved the truth before they signed mortgage papers. Silence settled hard after that. Even the old ceiling fan above the counter suddenly sounded loud. Patricia studied me for another second, measuring whether anger or sympathy would work better now. "Careful, Wesley," she said quietly enough that only nearby tables could hear. "If property values collapse because of your actions, those families will remember who caused it." There it was. Not legal pressure. Emotional leverage. Patricia never threatened directly when manipulation could leave cleaner fingerprints. She picked up her umbrella and walked back into the storm while every eye in the diner followed her. But the atmosphere had changed. People were not admiring her anymore. They were studying her. Outside, rainwater rushed along the curb beside the parking lot while thunder rolled low across Blackwater Lake. I sat there another minute staring into my coffee until Darlene slid something folded beside my hand. "Woman dropped this near the register yesterday," she murmured. "Thought it belonged to some contractor." Then I saw the subdivision logo. She walked away before I could ask another question. Inside the folded papers sat a preliminary environmental review request tied to Holloway Ridge Phase 2 development. Marina traffic estimates. Shoreline dredging references. Expanded utility trenching through easement corridors across Granger Ranch. But the part that stopped me cold sat highlighted in yellow marker near the bottom. Conditional roadway dependency subject to uninterrupted ranch cooperation. Cooperation. Not ownership. Not transfer rights. Cooperation. I leaned back slowly while rain rattled the diner windows harder now. Patricia's entire expansion depended on voluntary easement continuity from my ranch, which meant if she knowingly interfered with protected ranch operations while submitting development disclosures claiming stable access, she had potentially exposed every investor, contractor, and board member tied to the project. Not criminal. Worse, financial liability. The kind wealthy suburban communities fear more than storms or lawsuits. By the time I drove back toward the ranch, social pressure had spread even further. 2 Holloway Ridge residents stood arguing beside the chain gate, while a delivery truck idled behind them on the muddy gravel shoulder. One woman noticed my truck approaching and immediately stopped talking. The other did not. "You told us the road was permanent," she snapped toward somebody on speakerphone. "Patricia, probably. My husband looked at those documents before we bought this house." I stayed inside the truck listening for another few seconds while cold lake wind pushed fog through the fence posts. Fear had entered the subdivision now. Real fear. Not outrage anymore. Financial panic. That changes people faster than morality ever does. As I climbed out of the truck, Lucy stepped onto the porch holding her tablet with worried eyes. "Grandpa," she said carefully, "somebody posted drone footage of our ranch online." I took the tablet from her. The video showed survey overlays across my pasture, while dramatic music played underneath captions accusing me of blocking emergency services to elderly residents. Thousands of views already. Comments flooding in. Some angry, some confused. Then I noticed something else. The account that uploaded the footage belonged to Holloway Ridge Community Relations. Patricia had officially turned this into a public campaign. I stared across the pasture toward the subdivision lights glowing through fog over the ridge, then down at the environmental paperwork still sitting in my hand. For the first time since this started, I stopped thinking like a rancher protecting land. I started thinking like somebody preparing a legal counterattack. The next morning, I unlocked my grandfather's document case before sunrise while rain drifted softly against the ranch house windows and fog pressed low across the lake like something alive. The kitchen smelled like black coffee, wet denim, and old paper. Lucy sat quietly at the far end of the table pretending to do homework while watching me sort through property maps older than both of us combined. She knew enough not to interrupt when family documents came out. Around 6:15, I found what I had been looking for buried beneath a stack of cattle tax records from the 1980s. Original easement maintenance agreements tied to Granger Ranch access routes. Hand-signed. County sealed. Conditional roadway dependency language highlighted in fading blue ink by somebody decades ago. Probably my father. Maybe even my grandfather. I sat there staring at one paragraph while thunder rolled softly somewhere beyond Blackwater Lake. Any obstruction, interference, or unauthorized commercial conversion affecting primary ranch operations may result in immediate suspension pending county review. Not revocation. Suspension. Temporary but devastating. Especially for a subdivision dependent on one road and already halfway through expansion financing. That was when the emotional part of this fight finally burned out of me. Patricia wanted outrage because outrage makes old landowners look unstable. Calm paperwork terrifies people like her far more. By 8 o'clock, I was parked outside the office of Martin Keller, a land use attorney who looked permanently exhausted by rich people and zoning boards. Rainwater dripped off my jacket onto his office floor while he read through the easement documents under fluorescent lights that hummed louder than the courthouse hallway outside. He did not speak for almost 4 full minutes. Finally, he leaned back slowly. "Wesley," he said carefully, "if what you are telling me is accurate, Holloway Ridge may have disclosed guaranteed roadway continuity during active legal vulnerability." In English, he rubbed his forehead. If they sold expansion lots without disclosing conditional access dependency tied to private ranch cooperation, investors, insurers, and mortgage lenders are going to panic. Panic. There was that word again. I looked out his office window toward the county parking lot, where rain blurred headlights into pale streaks across wet pavement. What happens if county review gets triggered? I asked. Keller gave me a long look first. Every permit tied to Phase 2 freezes until access liability gets resolved. That changed everything. Not emotionally. Structurally. Because Patricia's power depended on momentum, construction schedules, investor confidence, resident trust, controlled narratives. Once delays enter development money, people stop smiling at board meetings. They start hiring attorneys. By noon, Keller had filed formal requests for environmental review suspension tied to disputed easement interference. Quiet filings. No dramatic lawsuits yet. Strategic pressure instead. The kind that spreads slowly through insurance departments and county inboxes before anybody realizes how dangerous it is. Patricia felt it almost immediately. Around 2:30, my phone rang from a private number. "You filed against the expansion permits." No greeting. No fake warmth anymore. Just tension hiding beneath polished control. I stood near the equipment barn watching cold wind ripple across flooded pasture grass. "No," I answered calmly. I requested clarification on roadway dependency disclosures. Long silence. Then Patricia lowered her voice. "Do you understand what you are doing to this community? Do you?" Another silence. Heavier this time. Somewhere behind me, rainwater dripped steadily from the metal roof onto muddy gravel, while cattle shifted restlessly near the fence line. Patricia finally exhaled sharply. Residents are already contacting lenders. There it was. Fear. Real fear now. Not about roads. About money. About mortgages. About investments built on unstable disclosures. "That sounds stressful," I said quietly. She hung up without another word. By evening, Holloway Ridge looked different from the ranch hill overlooking the subdivision. Garage lights stayed on longer. Groups of residents stood outside in driveways talking under umbrellas despite the rain. 2 moving trucks sat near the entrance road while somebody argued beside the HOA mailbox cluster. The social collapse had started. And for the first time since Patricia chained my gates shut, I realized she was no longer controlling the speed of this story. By the third day of rain, the entire valley smelled like soaked cedar, diesel fuel, and nervous money. Fog drifted thick over Blackwater Lake every morning now, swallowing the fishing docks and lower shoreline until the subdivision lights looked stranded above the clouds. Holloway Ridge had gone quiet in the strangest way. Not peaceful quiet. Social quiet. The kind that settles over communities right before somebody important falls apart publicly. From my pasture fence, I watched residents gathering in small circles near the entrance road before work, talking beside idling sport utility vehicles while avoiding the HOA office entirely. Nobody parked near Patricia's house anymore. Even the landscaping crew skipped her lawn that Thursday morning. That detail almost made me laugh because Patricia used to find people over unmowed grass within 48 hours. Around noon, Martin Keller called while I was repairing storm damage along the north fence line. Rain tapped softly against the brim of my hat, while muddy water rushed through the drainage ditch beside the gravel road. You need to know lenders are requesting clarification documents directly from the county now, he said. 3 real estate transactions in Holloway Ridge paused overnight. I leaned against the fence post quietly. How bad? Keller exhaled slowly. Bad enough that the board scheduled an emergency resident meeting tonight. That changed the rhythm immediately. Emergency meetings mean panic has escaped private conversations and entered public spaces. Patricia could control emails. She could control social media posts. She could not control 42 anxious homeowners sitting in one room realizing their investments might depend on a ranch owner she publicly antagonized. By evening, thunder rolled low over the county while rain hammered the metal roof of the Holloway Ridge clubhouse hard enough to drown out half the parking lot conversations. I stayed outside near my truck for a while watching residents hurry through puddles carrying folders, phones, and mortgage paperwork. Nobody looked confident anymore. 2 men standing near the entrance stopped talking completely when Patricia arrived in her white Lexus. Usually people gathered around her immediately. That night they stepped aside instead. Tiny movement. Huge meaning. Social authority does not collapse all at once. It erodes through hesitation first. Patricia noticed it too. I could tell by how tightly she held her umbrella walking toward the clubhouse doors. Wesley, she called out when she spotted me leaning against my truck. Her voice carried forced calm now, controlled but strained around the edges. Are you really planning to stand out here while families panic? I did not sell them unstable disclosures, I answered quietly. A few residents nearby heard that. Nobody defended her. That silence landed harder than yelling ever could. Inside the clubhouse, the atmosphere felt suffocating. Wet jackets, burnt coffee, folding chairs scraping old tile floors. Rain drumming overhead while residents whispered in nervous clusters instead of sitting down. Patricia stood near the front podium, clutching printed statements that suddenly looked useless in her hands. Then the questions started. Not angry at first. Confused. Careful. Why are lenders reviewing access rights? Did the board know the road was conditional? What exactly did we sign? Patricia tried to regain control with polished phrases about temporary misunderstandings and malicious legal pressure campaigns. But halfway through her explanation, a man near the back stood up holding a thick mortgage folder. You told us roadway access was permanent during the purchase meeting, he said flatly. The room went dead silent after that. Patricia opened her mouth to answer, and nothing came out for almost 3 full seconds. In politics, law, and HOA power structures, silence like that is fatal. Somebody else muttered, Jesus Christ. Another resident quietly walked out of the room. Then another. Nobody looked at Patricia anymore. They looked at each other. And for the first time since she chained my ranch gates shut, Patricia Holloway stood completely alone in a room she used to control. The meeting collapsed 20 minutes later under the weight of its own fear. Nobody shouted at first. That was the unsettling part. Residents just started standing up one by one, gathering folders and walking toward Patricia with questions she could no longer smooth over with neighborhood language and polished smiles. Outside the clubhouse, rain pounded the parking lot hard enough to turn the gravel shoulder into muddy runoff flowing toward the lake below. Thunder rolled low across Blackwater County while headlights cut through fog gathering over the shoreline. I stayed near the back wall watching Patricia lose control inch by inch. You told us access rights were secure, a woman near the front said quietly while clutching closing documents against her chest. Patricia forced another smile. This is a temporary legal misunderstanding amplified by emotional reactions. Then why are lenders freezing transactions? Somebody else snapped. More voices joined after that. Not outrage anymore. Panic layered with embarrassment. People hate realizing they were manipulated in public, especially wealthy homeowners who believe they bought certainty. Patricia tried redirecting blame toward me again. Mr. Granger has escalated this unnecessarily instead of cooperating with community growth. I finally stepped forward then, boots still damp from ranch mud, jacket smelling faintly of rain and wet cedar. You chained private property access while filing expansion permits that depended on uninterrupted easement cooperation, I said calmly. That is not growth. That is liability. The room went silent again. Patricia's jaw tightened visibly this time. No recovery smile. No polished posture. Just fatigue creeping through the cracks. Then the clubhouse doors opened behind us. Sheriff Coulter Briggs walked in beside two county officials carrying document cases sealed in plastic against the rain. Every conversation died immediately. Even Patricia looked stunned for half a second before forcing herself upright again. One county official stepped forward. We are here regarding emergency review authorization connected to Holloway Ridge Phase 2 permit disclosures. Nobody moved. The sheriff removed his hat slowly while rainwater dripped onto the clubhouse floor. Board members need to remain available tonight, he said carefully. County review is now active. Active. One word. Total atmosphere shift. Residents started whispering instantly. Somebody near the coffee station muttered, "Oh my God." Another homeowner quietly walked out into the storm, holding his phone against his forehead like he was already calling an attorney. Patricia tried regaining control immediately. This is procedural, she insisted sharply. Nobody needs to panic. But the county official interrupted her calmly. Mrs. Holloway, your board submitted roadway continuity disclosures while conditional dependency disputes were unresolved. Patricia blinked once. Our legal team reviewed those documents. That may become relevant later, the official answered. Later. Even the phrasing sounded dangerous now. I watched Patricia look around the room, searching for support out of instinct. Nobody met her eyes. Not one person. The social authority she spent years building had evaporated inside a single rainstorm. Then came the final shift. One of the board members standing near the wall suddenly spoke up without looking at Patricia. I voted against the gate closure, he said quietly. The room turned toward him instantly. Patricia stared at the man in complete disbelief. Excuse me. He swallowed hard. You told us the easement issue was already cleared through county review. That landed harder than anything else all night, because betrayal inside leadership structures changes panic into collapse. Patricia opened her mouth to answer, but another board member avoided eye contact completely. Then another. Outside thunder cracked over the lake loud enough to rattle the clubhouse windows, while cold wind pushed rain sideways through the parking lot. And standing there beneath fluorescent lights with county officials watching her and residents backing away emotionally one seat at a time, Patricia Holloway finally looked exactly what she had spent years making other people feel. Cornered. 3 weeks later, the rain finally stopped over Blackwater County. The fog still rolled across the lake every morning, but now it moved quietly instead of carrying panic with it. The county hearing took place on a gray Thursday inside an old courtroom that smelled like damp carpet, coffee thermoses, and wet wool coats. Every seat filled before 9 o'clock. Holloway Ridge residents packed the back rows holding folders, lender notices, insurance letters, and printed emails from the HOA board. Nobody sat near Patricia Holloway. That detail mattered more than anything said inside the room. She arrived alone wearing another expensive cream blazer that suddenly looked tired under courthouse lighting. No smiling residents. No board members surrounding her. No polished authority left. Just silence following her down the aisle like a sentence already written. Martin Keller laid the final documents before the county review panel with calm precision, while rainwater slid slowly down the courthouse windows behind him. Original easement restrictions. Environmental dependency clauses. Internal board communications. Expansion disclosures filed before roadway stability verification. But the worst document came from Patricia's own inbox. A leaked email sent 6 weeks before she chained my ranch gates shut. If Granger resists, Pressure access until cooperation becomes unavoidable. The room changed after that. You could feel it physically. Residents stopped looking confused and started looking betrayed. One woman quietly covered her mouth. A man near the back shook his head and walked out before the hearing even ended. Patricia tried defending herself one final time. "My intention was community development," she said carefully, voice tight now. "I acted in the best interests of neighborhood growth." The county investigator looked up from the file slowly. "Mrs. Holloway, your board weaponized access dependency tied to private land while withholding unresolved legal vulnerability from residents and lenders." Even Patricia knew there was no clean response left after that. By noon, the county suspended all Holloway Ridge Phase 2 permits pending full liability review. The board lost operational authority over roadway enforcement immediately. Emergency access control reverted back to original ranch easement supervision under county oversight. Socially, the collapse moved even faster. Residents filed complaints against the HOA board within days. 2 board members resigned publicly. Real estate agents stopped advertising the subdivision entirely until legal review settled. Patricia's name spread through county gossip like smoke through dry timber. At Miller's Diner, people stopped lowering their voices when discussing her. That was the real punishment in a town like ours. Public memory, public embarrassment, quiet judgment that never fully leaves. A week later, Sheriff Briggs personally handed me the county authorization releasing all unlawful gate restrictions. We drove together through cold morning air while fog drifted low across the muddy shoreline near Miller Creek. The old ranch gates stood where my grandfather left them decades ago, chains finally gone. I rested my hand against the cold iron for a second longer than necessary because I realized something standing there. I had spent most of this fight terrified of losing the ranch itself. But what almost disappeared was something deeper. Dignity. Family continuity. The feeling that old things still mattered in modern America. Lucy stood beside me holding fresh paint supplies for the gate posts, while sunlight finally broke through the clouds over Blackwater Lake for the first time in nearly a month. "You keeping the gates open?" she asked quietly. I looked down the gravel road toward Holloway Ridge, sitting silent above the ridge line. "For people who respect the land," I answered. "Yes." That afternoon, ranch trucks rolled freely through the entrance road again, while cattle moved calmly across the pasture like the valley itself had finally exhaled. The fishing docks reappeared through thinning fog. Wind pushed softly across wet cedar trees near the shoreline. Somewhere behind us, life in Holloway Ridge kept unraveling under lawsuits, lender reviews, insurance investigations, and angry homeowners demanding answers from people they used to trust blindly. Patricia sold her house less than 4 months later. Nobody organized a farewell gathering. Nobody posted supportive messages online. The last time I saw her, she sat alone inside her Lexus outside the subdivision entrance, staring at the reopened ranch gates while rain drifted lightly across the windshield. She looked smaller somehow. Not defeated dramatically, just emptied out by consequences she thought would only happen to other people. In the end, this story was never really about one road. It was about what happens when people mistake paperwork for ownership, manipulation for leadership, and old family land for something weak enough to intimidate. The truth is, land remembers character long after communities forget slogans. Holloway Ridge wanted progress without respect. Patricia wanted control without accountability. And both learned the same lesson the hard way. Never corner somebody protecting a legacy older than your ambition. Because real power is not loud. Real power waits, documents everything, and survives storms longer than arrogance ever can. If this story taught anything, it is that dignity matters more than appearances, truth eventually outlives manipulation, and communities built on fear always collapse from the inside first. Standing there beside those reopened gates with cold lake wind moving through the valley and my granddaughter laughing somewhere near the barn, I realized something else too. Some victories are not about revenge. They are about making sure the next generation still has something honest left to inherit. Rank the story from 10 to 0. I would love to know what you think.